She was one of the most powerful women in the city, a billionaire. Admired, untouchable, or so everyone thought. But the night she needed blood to stay alive, something unthinkable happened. Her own children, those she raised, trusted, and gave everything to, refused to help. No explanation, no hesitation, just silence. And then, out of nowhere, a single father stepped forward. No wealth, no status, just an old, worn photo clutched in his hand, and a truth no one saw coming. What he revealed didn't just shock the room, it exposed a hidden story of betrayal, identity, and a painful reality tied to race that no one was ready to face. The question is, why did her own family turn away, and what was in that photo that changed everything? For years, she had been known as a woman who built everything from nothing, a billionaire whose name carried power in every room she entered. Her world was polished, controlled, and distant from struggle. Inside her mansion, surrounded by luxury, her children lived lives most people could only dream of. To the outside world, they were the perfect family. Successful, respected, untouchable. But behind those walls, something felt off. Her children rarely spoke about the past. Questions about where they came from, about the early days before the wealth, were always brushed aside. It was as if a part of their story had been quietly erased, and she allowed it, never correcting them, never pushing back. Meanwhile, across the city, a single father lived a very different life. No spotlight, no privilege. Just long hours, quiet sacrifices, and a past he never fully escaped. He held on to one thing more than anything else, an old photo, worn at the edges, carrying a memory that refused to fade. Their worlds were never supposed to collide. But sometimes the truth has a way of finding its moment. And on the night when everything was on the line, the past didn't just return, it demanded to be seen. The hospital room was silent except for the steady, fragile beeping of machines. Doctors moved quickly, their voices low but urgent. She needed blood immediately. There was no time to wait, no room for error. Her children were the first to be called in. One by one they stepped forward, and one by one they stepped back. Excuses came quickly, too quickly. "I'm not a match. I can't right now. There has to be another way." Their voices lacked panic, lacked urgency. It wasn't fear, it was distance. Cold, calculated distance. The doctors exchanged confused glances. This wasn't normal. Not for a family like this, not when time was running out. And then something even stranger happened. A nurse quietly mentioned that no official compatibility tests had even been completed yet. So how did they already know? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. Outside the room, whispers began to spread. Staff members exchanged looks, piecing together what didn't make sense. A billionaire fighting for her life, and her own children refusing before even trying. It felt wrong, deeply wrong. Then the doors opened. A man walked in, hesitant, out of place. His clothes were simple, worn from years of hard work. In his hand, he held something tight, like it was the only thing keeping him grounded, an old photo. Security moved quickly, blocking his path. He didn't belong here, not in this polished, controlled world. The looks he received said everything. Suspicion, judgment, dismissal. "Sir, you can't be here." But he didn't leave. Instead, he raised the photo with shaking hands. "She knows me," he said, his voice steady despite everything around him. "Or at least, she used to." The room shifted. Something in his tone made people pause. Not loud, not aggressive, just certain. A doctor stepped forward, trying to maintain order. "This isn't the time." "It is," the man interrupted, his grip tightening. "Because what's happening in that room, it's not just about blood." The tension snapped tighter. Security hesitated, unsure. The staff exchanged uncertain glances. And for a brief moment, everything slowed, like the world was waiting for something to break. Inside the room, the machines let out a sharper sound. Time was slipping. Outside, the man finally stepped forward, placing the photo where everyone could see it. At first, no one reacted. Then, someone leaned closer, and everything changed. The image showed a younger version of her, long before the wealth, before the power. But she wasn't alone. Standing beside her was a man who looked exactly like the one holding the photo now, and in her arms, a child. The realization hit like a shockwave. This wasn't just a stranger. This was a past she had hidden, a past her children clearly knew about and feared. Suddenly, their refusal made sense, but only in the most disturbing way. Because if the truth in that photo was real, then this wasn't just a medical emergency. It was something much deeper, something they were willing to let her die to keep buried. The room fell into a suffocating silence. All eyes locked on the photo, then slowly turned to her children. One of them finally broke. "That picture means nothing," he snapped, but his voice trembled. Another stepped forward, anger rising too fast, too defensive. "You don't belong here. This is private." But the man didn't move. "Private?" he repeated, his voice low, steady. "You call this private? While she's dying because of the truth you're hiding?" The words hit harder than anyone expected. Inside the room, the machines let out a sharp, uneven tone. A doctor rushed out, urgency written all over his face. "We're running out of time. If we don't find a donor, I'll do it." Every head turned. The man stepped forward, his grip on the photo loosening as he placed it down. "Test me." A pause, just long enough to feel unbearable. One of the children shook their head immediately. "No, that's not necessary." "Not necessary." The doctor frowned. "At this point, we test anyone willing." But the resistance grew stronger. "We said no," another child insisted, stepping in front of him. "He's not family." That's when it clicked for everyone watching. This wasn't about compatibility. This was about rejection, about drawing a line so deep, so rooted, that even in a life-or-death moment, they refused to cross it. The man looked at them, really looked at them. Not with anger, but with something heavier. Pain, recognition. "You know exactly who I am," he said quietly. No one answered. But they didn't have to, because in that moment the truth was louder than anything they could say. The doctor made the call. "We don't have time for this. Get him tested, now." Everything moved fast after that. Too fast to stop, too urgent to argue. Minutes felt like seconds. And then the result came in. A perfect match. The room froze. The children stood there silent, exposed, not just by the result, but by what it meant. The man they tried to keep out was the one person who could save her. And as he was rushed past them toward the room they tried to block him from, one question hung in the air, impossible to ignore. What truth were they so desperate to bury that they were willing to let their own mother die to protect it? The surgery lasted hours, but for those waiting outside, it felt like a lifetime. When the doors finally opened, the doctor's expression said everything. She had survived. A quiet wave of relief moved through the room. But it didn't reach everyone. Her children stood frozen, unable to celebrate, unable to speak. Because survival came with a cost, a truth they could no longer control. Days later, when she finally opened her eyes, the first face she saw wasn't one of her children. It was his. The man they tried to keep out. For a moment, she just stared. And then something broke. Not fear. Not confusion. Recognition. Deep, undeniable recognition. The kind that doesn't come from wealth or status, but from a past that was never meant to resurface. Tears filled her eyes as the weight of everything came rushing back. The choices she made, the life she built, and the truth she left behind. Outside that room, silence still hung between her children, but now it was different, heavier, exposed, because their refusal hadn't just revealed a secret. It revealed something deeper, a line they were unwilling to cross. A bias so strong, so ingrained, that even in the face of death, they chose distance over humanity. And that's what makes this story hard to ignore. Because this wasn't just about one family. It wasn't just about one moment in a hospital. It was about a reality that exists far beyond those walls, where identity can outweigh compassion, where truth is buried to protect comfort, and where the cost of prejudice is measured in human lives. She survived. But the question is, what about the countless others who don't? How many chances are lost? Not because help isn't there, but because it's refused. If this story made you feel something, don't just scroll past it. Because the real change begins when we stop looking away and start asking ourselves, what would we have done?